In the unforgiving heart of the frontier, one woman's hope flickers like a lone lantern on a moonless night. Evelyn Stone, a young widowed mother, finds herself stranded in a terrifying mountain storm with her daughter clinging to her side. Little does she know her desperate path is about to cross with a hardened Texas Ranger, Jake Carter, who carries secrets as heavy as his rifle. What begins as a harrowing struggle for survival soon sparks a blaze of passion and danger that cannot be tamed. Prepare yourself. This is no ordinary tale of love and law, but a legend born of grit, courage, and unbreakable faith. Evelyn Stone stood on the crest of a nameless rise in the Davis Mountains. Icy wind lashing her cheeks. The bulky coat she wore had once belonged to her late husband, Andrew Stone, and it hung on her slender frame, a physical reminder of the man she had lost. Her daughter Lucy, 12 years old, freckled and as stubborn as the West Texas goats she loved so dearly, trembled beside her, clutching the donkey's halter. They were alone in a wilderness that could swallow lesser souls whole. Andrew Stone had died 6 months prior in a tragic ranch accident near Fort Davis. He was a respected cattle rancher who had once served under the famed Texas Ranger Captain Bill McDonald. Though Andrew's role had mostly been to scout out local trouble and deliver supplies, he had spoken of his time with Captain McDonald in reverent tones. Evelyn used to joke that Andrew was half in love with the ranger life. Now, with Andrew gone, the memory of those stories was more painful than ever. They had left the ranch after Andrew's funeral because the bank threatened to foreclose on their land. The ranch wasn't profitable without Andrew's expertise, and Evelyn had no means to fight. Faced with financial ruin, she packed up Lucy and whatever few possessions they could carry. She sold the livestock, save for one donkey. Lucy named Dusk, and 2 horses that had belonged to Andrew. Some meager coin rattled in Evelyn's purse as she traveled in search of distant kin. But misfortune seemed to dog their every step. A raging autumn storm had crept upon them in the mountains, hurling them into a battle against nature itself. The sky burned an ominous grey, and the threat of snow now lingered in the freezing rain. It was too early in the season for such fierce weather, but the desert highlands were as unpredictable as life itself. The path had narrowed underfoot, slick with ice as the winds battered them from the ridges. "I can't feel my fingers," Lucy stammered through chattering teeth. Evelyn steadied her daughter with a gentle hand on her back. "We'll find shelter soon. Keep praying, Lucy. Pray with all your heart." Inwardly, Evelyn prayed as well, though she wondered if her pleas even reached heaven. She had prayed for Andrew when he was pinned beneath the tractor that fateful day, and for all her heartache and tears, God had not spared him. Still in these mountains, her faith was all she had left. Jake Carter was not a man prone to sentiment. Tall, lean, and broad-shouldered, he carried with him an air of quiet authority that had earned him a revered place among his peers. The silver Texas Ranger badge, pinned to his worn leather vest, was not merely an emblem, but an extension of his identity. Many in the Ranger Division whispered that Jake Carter had never lost a gunfight, though most recognized it was his cunning and compassion that made him truly legendary. He once rode under the orders of famed Texas Ranger Frank Hamer, had crossed paths with Bass Reeves in the Indian Territory, and was rumored to have locked horns with deadly outlaws across the Rio Grande. Now Jake found himself traveling these mountainous trails on a mission to track a fugitive rumored to be hiding in remote canyons. The wanted man was named Clyde Bone Hardy, a rustler and thief who had slithered through the cracks of justice more times than Jake cared to count, Captain Bill MacDonald himself had scrawled a personal note at the end of the fugitive's wanted poster. If Carter can't find him, no one can. But as the storm thickened, Jake realized he needed to find a place to hole up for the night. Even a ranger's grit couldn't stop nature's fury. His dappled horse. Cassie snorted nervously, her ears flicking back at the looming thunder. The precipitation had shifted from freezing rain to heavy flakes swirling in the gusts that howled across the ridges. "Easy, girl," Jake murmured. He scanned the rocky slopes for some sign of shelter, perhaps a shallow cave or even a copse of juniper that could break the wind. The temperature plummeted with each passing minute. He had a thick oilskin slicker, but the cold needled through it, biting at his bones. When he noticed faint tracks, hoofprints and footprints barely visible through the slush, his curiosity piqued. Who in their right mind would travel these peaks in such weather? Setting his jaw, Jake urged Cassie forward, following the trail with an edge of concern. If someone was out here, especially someone ill-prepared, they could be in serious peril. A ranger's duty was to serve the people of Texas, even if it meant straying from one's main pursuit. Lightning cracked in the distance, and an echoing boom reverberated across the canyon walls. Snow battered Jake's face. He tugged his hat low, urging Cassie onward. Something told him that these faint tracks were left by more than a single wanderer. He had a sinking suspicion they were in trouble, and trouble was exactly what he never ignored. Evelyn and Lucy huddled beneath a ledge of limestone protruding from the mountainside. It wasn't much of a cave, more like a shallow nook that offered scant protection from the wind-driven snow. They had managed to gather a small supply of firewood, twigs, and branches Lucy collected, while Evelyn tried to calm the spooked donkey. The fire they lit sputtered, nearly drowned by the swirling wind. Lucy coughed, her eyes watery from the smoke. "Mama, I'm frightened." Evelyn stroked Lucy's hair. "I know, my love, but we'll get through this. We have to." The donkey stamped its hooves, braying in distress. The horses were tied to a scraggly pine trunk, equally unsettled, their ears flattened backward. Visibility dropped with every passing moment. Evelyn felt as though the mountains themselves were closing around them. In the flickering firelight, she glimpsed Lucy's pale face. Guilt stabbed Evelyn's heart. She had brought her child into this nightmare, forced by circumstances no mother should face alone. Then amid the howling wind, she heard the crunch of approaching hooves. Her breath caught in her throat. Could this be an outlaw or a decent traveler? Her heart hammered. Raising her head, she listened. The glow of a lantern bobbed in the distance. Jake Carter emerged from the wall of swirling snow, a solitary figure astride a resolute mare. Even in the storm's chaos, his posture exuded confidence. He reined in Cassie, scanning the scene with a keen, practiced eye. 2 horses, a donkey, a woman, a girl, clearly in dire straits. Evelyn scrambled to her feet, clutching a half-burnt branch, as if it could serve as a weapon. "Who are you?" she shouted through the gale. Jake tipped his hat, his tone carrying a polite, calming drawl. "Jake Carter, ma'am. Texas Ranger. Looks like you could use a hand." The simple statement battered down Evelyn's last vestiges of fear. She blinked snow from her lashes. A Texas Ranger out here felt like the answer to a prayer, except she wasn't sure if she believed in miracles anymore. Still, she forced her voice to remain steady. "We're traveling. Got caught in the storm." Jake took in the donkey, the woman's trembling daughter, and the exhausted horses. He dismounted in one fluid motion, approaching slowly, so as not to spook them. "My fire kit's in my saddlebag," he said, lifting his voice above the wind. "I've got some extra blankets, too. Mind if I help?" Evelyn hesitated for only a moment before stepping aside. She watched this tall, broad-shouldered ranger dig through his saddlebag. He pulled out a neat oilcloth-wrapped kit and a couple of thick wool blankets. Lucy eyed him cautiously, pressing close to her mother. As Jake knelt by the struggling fire, his hat brim cradled the swirling flakes. He shielded the flame with his wide shoulders, coaxing it back to life with a practiced patience that hinted at countless nights spent on the trail. In minutes, the fire crackled with newfound vitality. Warmth spread across Evelyn's numb fingers as she held them out. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice nearly lost to the wind. Jake nodded. "I saw your tracks. I'm guessing you need better shelter than this ledge. There's a decent chance we can find a cabin or line shack nearby. Ranchers around these parts sometimes keep shelters stocked for emergencies." Evelyn exhaled relief and worry mingling. She had prayed for help. Now a Texas Ranger was offering exactly that, but her pride wrestled with her gratitude. She glanced at Lucy, who looked on the verge of tears. Evelyn gave a short nod. "Lead the way, Ranger." Jake's eyes shifted to Lucy. He offered a soft smile. "You'll be warm soon, miss. My name's Jake Carter. Let's get your donkey loaded up. We'll find you both somewhere safe for the night." Little did any of them know that this fateful encounter was about to set in motion a chain of events that neither bullets nor blizzards could stop. With the meager flames dying and the storm intensifying, Jake guided Evelyn, Lucy, and their animals through the swirling drifts. His memory of the region told him there might be an old line shack once used by a ranch named after the Allens, a real family whose ranch had stood in these mountains for 2 decades. He'd heard talk of it from a ranger comrade, Lawrence Parker, who once bunked there during a blizzard. If it still existed, it would be little more than a shack, but it might have a roof and 4 walls. That in this weather was a blessing. They moved single file to avoid losing one another in the blinding snow. Lucy clung tightly to the donkey's lead, her mother bringing up the rear to ensure none of their animals fell behind. The wind whipped across their path, sometimes gusting so fiercely that Lucy stumbled, tears freezing on her cheeks. Each time Jake halted, turning Cassie around to check on them. "Hold on." He'd call his voice a steady beacon. "Just a bit farther." Evelyn felt her legs growing heavy, each step an exercise in sheer will. Though relatively young at 29, her grief and hardships had aged her spirit, yet here she was, trudging through a mountain storm, with a child depending on her following a ranger she'd never met until tonight. She thought about Andrew. What would he think of all this? If he were still alive, would they be on their ranch right now, safe from the gale? The swirl of memory and regret made her stumble, her foot slipping on a patch of ice. Before she could fall, strong hands caught her arms. Jake was off his horse in an instant. "Easy," he said softly. He studied her face with genuine concern. "You all right, Mrs. Stone?" She gasped, righting herself. "Evelyn Stone." He lingered a moment, his gaze flicking downward to Lucy, who was blinking back tears. Jake seemed to measure how close they were to utter collapse. He nodded, returning to Cassie's reins. "We can rest once we're at the line shack. Let's keep moving." When they finally spotted the silhouette of a tiny structure amid the snowscape relief washed over them. The shack was barely more than a single room, with a pitched roof built of rough-hewn logs. Weather-beaten shutters hung from warped hinges. Jake dismounted to inspect the door, carefully pushing it open. Evelyn's heart pounded with apprehension. There was always a chance of squatters or animals taking refuge. Inside, however, the shack was deserted. Musty, cold air greeted them, but the floor was dry and the walls seemed sturdy. A battered wood-burning stove occupied one corner, and a pile of dusty blankets lay in another. A wooden crate of old canned goods rested against the far wall. The place was far from luxurious, but it felt like a palace compared to the relentless storm outside. Jake lit a lantern hanging from a rusty hook in the ceiling. Shadows danced across the cramped. Lucy dropped to her knees, exhaling a sob of relief. Evelyn was too overwhelmed to speak. Jake set to work quickly. He pulled a few dry logs stacked near the stove and lit them with his kit. Soon the shack filled with the scent of burning wood. Warmth, faint at first, began to creep through the gloom. Evelyn and Lucy huddled near the stove, soaking in the heat. Jake tied their animals to a half-collapsed lean-to behind the shack, where they'd be sheltered from the wind. He returned, stamping slush from his boots, and removed his heavy coat. Evelyn's eyes lingered on the star pinned to his vest, an emblem of authority and service. She realized she was placing her life and her daughters in the hands of a stranger. A ranger. Yes, but still a stranger. Jake hung his coat on a peg. "Oh, you two should drink something warm. Let's see what we have here." He checked the crate of canned goods, fishing out a can of beans and another labeled chili. A small bag of coffee grounds lay in the corner, albeit stale. We might still make this place homey enough for the night. Lucy let out a small laugh. It was the first sound of relief Evelyn had heard from her daughter in days. Evelyn tried to smile, though her lips felt chapped and raw. She watched as Jake rummaged, placing the cans near the stove. His gentle presence, surprising in a man so evidently capable of violence if necessary, stirred a kernel of gratitude in her. As the fire crackled and the temperature rose, Lucy's eyelids drooped. She'd had an exhausting journey, and soon she was asleep, wrapped in a blanket Jake had found in the shack. Evelyn forced herself to remain awake, shifting uncomfortably in Andrew's coat. She studied the quiet figure of the ranger, who had taken a seat on a stool, occasionally feeding the fire, and glancing at the swirling white outside. "Thank you, Evelyn," managed her voice low to not wake Lucy. "I don't know what we'd have done if you hadn't come along." Jake gave a small, courteous nod. "No need for thanks, ma'am. Rangers look after folks, especially those in need." She stared at the flickering flames, the memories of Andrew's final day churning in her mind. "It's been so hard since my husband died. If there's a God, I guess he sent you." Jake's expression softened, and for a moment Evelyn sensed a shadow of sorrow pass over his eyes. She wondered if he knew her loss or carried a loss of his own. But he merely leaned back and said, "Get some rest. We'll figure out the next steps when the storm lets up." Though countless questions buzzed in her head, exhaustion claimed her. In the hush of the shack, warmed by the stove's glow, mother and daughter drifted into a slumber, deeper than they'd known in months. Unbeknownst to them, the greatest storms were yet to come, not just from the weather, but from secrets and dangers that lurked beyond the fragile walls of that line shack. Dawn broke sluggishly, the snowstorm reduced to a relentless drizzle of ice and wind. Grey light seeped through the shack's battered shutters, revealing the footprints and horse tracks that Jake had made the previous night. Inside, Jake roused himself from a half-sleep. He'd propped himself in a corner rifle cradled against his shoulder, one eye half open to ensure no danger caught them off guard. He rose slowly, stretching out the stiffness in his limbs. Evelyn and Lucy were still curled up in blankets near the stove. Embers glowed in the stove's belly-proof that Jake had fed it throughout the night. He crossed to the small stack of logs and threw a few more on the fire. Outside, Cassie nickered, reminding him that the animals needed tending. He looked at the sleeping mother and daughter. Their faces relaxed in slumber, carried the lines of hardship. Jake quietly opened the door and stepped out to feed and water the animals. Fresh snow blanketed the ground at least a foot deep, glistening under the emerging sun. The donkey pawed at the icy ground. Jake found an old trough behind the shack, filled it with snowmelt from a battered bucket. He rubbed Cassie's muzzle, scanning the horizon. The storm clouds had moved east, leaving behind a ragged sky. Off in the distance, the peaks and canyons glowed under the pale morning light. When he returned inside, he found Evelyn awake, gently rubbing Lucy's back as the girl stretched. "Good morning," he greeted quietly. Evelyn nodded, managing a soft smile. "Morning. Thank you. Again." Jake shrugged, busying himself with the can of stale coffee grounds. He boiled water in a dented pot on the stove, soon handing them each a steaming tin cup. The coffee was bitter, but it was warm, which was all that mattered. Lucy made a face at her first sip, but she drank it anyway, grateful for the heat. "We should keep traveling, Mama," she said. "We need to find Aunt Clara in El Paso, right?" Evelyn's gaze flickered with uncertainty. She stirred her coffee. Yes, that was the plan. She turned to Jake. "We have family there. Well, my late husband's cousin. We hoped she'd take us in." Jake listened, nodding thoughtfully. "El Paso's a couple of days' ride from here, if the weather holds. But traveling after a storm like this is no small feat. There might be drifts blocking the passes. We should see what's feasible." Evelyn bit her lip. They had no choice but to move forward. What else could they do? She glanced at Lucy. "We're stronger than we look," she ventured, though the doubt in her voice betrayed her worry. Jake rubbed his jaw. "All right. We'll head out soon, but I'll scout a bit first. Make sure the route's passable." As he pulled on his coat and gathered his gear, Lucy tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mama, can I go outside for a moment? I want to see the horses." Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but bundle up. Stay close." Once Lucy stepped out, Jake paused near Evelyn. She stood in the small circle of warmth near the stove. Their eyes met, and she noticed a faint line of concern etched on his brow. "What is it?" she asked quietly. He cleared his throat. "There's no easy way to ask, but I need to know if you've seen or heard any trouble on the trail. I'm tracking a fugitive." She tensed. "A fugitive name's Clyde Bone Hardy," Jake explained. "Wanted for cattle rustling robbery and worse. The man's dangerous. Last I heard, he might be holed up somewhere in these mountains." Evelyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The idea of crossing paths with a criminal in these desolate peaks terrified her. "No, we haven't seen anything suspicious." Jake nodded. "All right. I'll keep an eye out. If he's nearby, you two could be in real danger." Evelyn swallowed hard. Even if they made it through the storm, the dangers of the frontier were unrelenting. Their predicament felt suffocating. Andrew was gone. She was nearly penniless now. A lawless fugitive prowled the region. She closed her eyes momentarily, grappling with the load on her shoulders. "Let's just hope we don't run into him," she managed, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. Jake gently touched her arm in an offer of comfort. "We'll get you to El Paso safe," he said, his tone firm with resolve. "Don't fret." And with that, he stepped out into the snowy morning, leaving her with her own swirling thoughts. By midday, they broke camp and navigated their way down the winding trail, flanked by steep cliffs and icy gullies. Lucy rode the donkey, while Evelyn handled one of the horses, leading the other behind her. Jake stayed in front, scanning the surroundings with an intensity honed by years of rangering. Wind scoured the exposed ridges, but the sun fought to break through. Meltwater trickled down rocky slopes, causing occasional patches of mud. Progress was slow. Evelyn and Lucy were still fatigued from the previous day's ordeal, and the animals showed signs of stress. Yet for a time the trek was uneventful, just the crunch of snow under hoof and the sigh of frigid air. Sometime past noon, the group descended into a narrow canyon walls, rising on either side like sentinels. The path leveled out, allowing them some respite. Jake halted, lifting a hand for silence. Evelyn pulled back on her reins, her heart thudding. The donkey brayed softly in protest, but Lucy patted its neck to quiet it. Jake dismounted, kneeling to examine something in the snow. After a moment, he beckoned Evelyn closer. "Ma'am, look at this." She guided her horse closer, peering down. Tracks hoofprints, likely from multiple horses, cut across the canyon floor. They were at least half a day old, maybe less. Jake's lips formed a thin line as he studied the spacing. They're heading west. Could be a small posse or rustlers driving stolen horses. Lucy's eyes widened. "Is it that man you're after?" Jake rose, patting Cassie's flank. "Hard to say for sure. But we ought to be cautious." They proceeded with greater vigilance, hugging the canyon wall to avoid exposing themselves. The sense of being watched crept into Evelyn's mind. Her pulse fluttered at the possibility that at any moment an outlaw could appear from behind a boulder, guns blazing. She thought of Andrew's old revolver tucked in her saddlebag. She hadn't fired it since her husband died. The hours dragged on each turn of the canyon, revealing more twists in the labyrinth of rock. Eventually, the walls opened into a broad valley, rimmed by evergreen pines. Before them spread a broken fence line, a derelict corral. A battered sign hung from a post Allen ranch. Jake exhaled. This is the old Allen place. They haven't run cattle here in years. Might be deserted. Yet as they rode closer, a stench hit them. Smoke and something foul. Jake dismounted again, rifle in hand. Evelyn's heart pounded. She dismounted too, urging Lucy to stay with the donkey. Carefully they approached what looked like a burnt-out barn. Charred timbers jutted skyward, still smouldering. "Stay back," Jake ordered softly. He circled the wreckage, scanning the ground for clues. Then behind the barn's remains, he found a scene that wrenched his gut. A couple of horses shot dead lay in the snow. Empty crates were strewn about. Evelyn stifled a gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Lucy turned away, tears brimming in her eyes. Jake crouched, pressing 2 fingers against the blackened remains. "Looks like someone torched this place recently." He pointed to fresh footprints, the same ones they'd seen in the canyon. "These folks, whoever they are ruthless. They might be the same group I'm after, or connected." A wave of nausea rolled through Evelyn. All of a sudden, the West Texas winter didn't seem like their biggest foe. "We need to leave," she whispered, a shudder running through her. "Please, Jake, let's get away from here." Jake nodded grimly. "Agreed. But we need to stay smart about it. If they're in the area, stumbling onto them unprepared would be deadly." Evelyn and Lucy moved the horses behind a stand of pines for temporary cover, while Jake scouted the homestead. He found no survivors, no signs of the rancher's only destruction. The footprints led away from the ranch, heading deeper into the wilderness. Upon his return, Jake's face was set like stone. "They're gone, but they left death in their wake. We'll skirt around this valley, keep to higher ground, and try to avoid them. If they spot us—" He trailed off, letting the gravity linger. Evelyn swallowed her fear and nodded. She had no illusions about their vulnerability. Without Jake, she and Lucy stood no chance. But she also couldn't ignore a nagging feeling of guilt. Innocent people had probably lived here. Now it was a graveyard. Could they just ride away? Jake, sensing her turmoil, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Mrs. Stone, I promise you, once I get you and your daughter to safety, I'll come back and track these killers down." She squeezed her eyes shut, nodding. "Thank you. Let's just get out of here." Together they turned their horses west, navigating a narrow pass that wound through the pines. Evelyn kept Lucy close, their donkey braying anxiously. Silent prayers flitted through her mind once more. She prayed they wouldn't meet the same fate as the owners of the Allen Ranch. As dusk approached, they found a secluded spot to make camp. Jake refused to risk traveling overnight through the passes with outlaws potentially roaming close by. They set up near a cluster of large boulders that would block the wind. With Lucy's help, Evelyn gathered kindling, while Jake patrolled the perimeter, ensuring no uninvited guests lurked in the shadows. When the fire was built, Evelyn heated some beans and hardtack. It was a pitiful meal, but in the harsh environment, any warm food felt like a banquet. Lucy, exhausted, ate in silence, though a flicker of relief crossed her face whenever Jake gave her a reassuring nod. Evelyn finished her portion, then watched Jake. He stood at the edge of the fire's light arms folded, gazing into the darkening night. There was something solitary about him, like a wolf that had learned to trust no one. She approached quietly, the crackle of flames punctuating the silence. "Jake," she said softly. He turned, eyes reflecting the firelight. "I just wanted to thank you again for everything. We wouldn't have made it this far without you." He gave a small shrug, but his gaze was distant. "I'm just doing what I swore to do." She studied the weariness etched in his face, the faint lines near his eyes. "It's more than that. You risked your own safety. You didn't have to." Jake didn't immediately reply. He shifted his stance as if deciding whether to share a piece of himself. Finally he spoke, voice low. "I had a wife once. Her name was Maria." He paused, swallowing. "She died a few years back, complications from pneumonia. We were out in the field, and help didn't reach us in time." Evelyn's breath caught. She had not expected such personal revelation. "I'm so sorry," she said gently, her own loss resonating with his. Jake nodded, eyes darkening with old grief. "After that, I threw myself into rangering. Figured if I could save others, maybe it'd dull the pain." Evelyn placed a hand on his arm. In that moment, they shared a silent bond of understanding. Both had lost someone irreplaceable. Both carried that sorrow across the untamed frontier. "It still hurts, doesn't it?" A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Some days it's quieter. Others it's like a fresh wound. But seeing you and Lucy reminds me what I lost." Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes. She blinked them away. "Andrew was a good man, too. He died in a tractor accident. I tried to save him, but..." Her voice broke. She took a shaky breath. "We carry on for those we love. That's all we can do." Jake exhaled, letting the tension in his shoulders ease. "Well, I promise you, Mrs. Stone, I'll do everything I can to keep you and Lucy safe. Nothing's gonna happen to either of you on my watch." "Evelyn," she corrected gently. "Call me Evelyn." Their eyes met, and an unspoken warmth passed between them. An ember of connection forged in the crucible of shared pain. But just as quickly, Jake stepped back, clearing his throat. "I'd best do another perimeter check before turning in." Evelyn nodded, understanding the distance he placed between them. She returned to Lucy, who had fallen asleep under her blanket donkey, dozing beside her. As Evelyn lay down, she stared at the stars overhead, the crisp night air biting her cheeks. She thought of Andrew, of Jake's quiet kindness, of Lucy's unwavering spirit. She whispered a soft prayer, for perhaps the first time in months, asking not just for survival, but for a new day that might bring healing. Little did she know how soon that day and new dangers would arrive. Dawn brought a veil of clouds, thick and heavy, with fresh snowfall. Jake urged them to set off early, hoping to outmaneuver any outlaws lingering in the region. The trail was slick, and the air carried a tense hush. Lucy rode in silence, glancing anxiously at the ridgelines above. Evelyn felt a knot tighten in her stomach. They pressed on for hours. The wind picked up again, swirling the snow around them in pale curtains. Visibility shrank. Evelyn clutched her coat tighter. It felt as though nature itself conspired to keep them wandering in these mountains. Mid-afternoon found them cresting a narrow ridge. The wind slammed them sideways, sending snow swirling in blinding gusts. Jake squinted, scanning the landscape. "Stay close," he hollered back to Evelyn and Lucy. They had trudged maybe 100 yards along that ridge when a shot rang out, a high-powered crack echoing across the canyon. Lucy shrieked, ducking instinctively. Evelyn's heart jolted. Jake whipped around, searching for the shooter. Another shot ricocheted off a boulder near them, sending shards of rock flying. Down Jake roared, urging Cassie behind cover. Evelyn tugged Lucy donkey, braying in terror, and scrambled behind an outcrop. Bullets whined overhead. Jake retrieved his rifle eyes, narrowing. The storm made it hard to see, but he spotted movement up on the ridge. A flash of muzzle smoke. "They're up high," he muttered. "Stay behind." Cover. Evelyn's mind spun. If these were outlaws, the same who burned the Allen ranch, they were out for blood. She clenched Andrew's revolver, hands shaking. Lucy huddled at her side, petrified. Jake returned fire, but the swirling wind and snow gave the attackers a natural shield. Minutes felt like hours. Gunshots popped sporadically, echoing through the canyon. Jake managed to land a shot that made one of the assailants duck behind a ledge. In the lull, he motioned urgently for Evelyn. "We need to move. Now, while they're pinned down." Evelyn willed her trembling legs to cooperate. She dragged Lucy along, following Jake, as he led Cassie down a steep slope. The donkey stumbled, but Lucy held tight. Bullets thudded into the snow behind them. Evelyn prayed for a miracle. Eventually, they reached a cluster of pines, the branches thick with snow. Jake guided them deeper into the trees, the gunfire growing distant. Finally, they halted, panting, hearts pounding. Lucy sobbed quietly, and Evelyn pulled her into a protective embrace. Jake crouched behind a trunk, scanning their back trail. After a tense minute, no further shots came. He turned to Evelyn. "We lost them for now, but they might come hunting. We have to keep moving." Evelyn's breath came in ragged gasps. Why? Why are they doing this?" Jake's jaw tightened. "They're desperate or just plain vicious. Could be the gang that's been harassing these parts. Might even be Hardy himself. They'll kill to protect their territory or their stolen goods." Lucy's face was streaked with tears. "Mama, I'm scared." Evelyn hugged her tight. "It's all right, baby. We'll be okay." But even as she said the words, uncertainty gnawed her soul. Jake reloaded his rifle, eyes hardened by determination. Let's head south. There's a small settlement near the foothills, Palmer's outpost. If we can reach it, we'll find help and a place to rest. It's only a half-day away, in good conditions. Evelyn felt relief at the mention of civilization, but the half-day journey through storm-lashed mountains and potential ambushes loomed like a dark wall. Then let's go, she said, voice steadied by maternal resolve. They pressed on, forging a new path across the wooded slope. The temperature dropped again, the wind shrieking through the pines. Despite the danger, they had no choice. The shadows stretched, and the day slipped away. If they didn't reach the outpost by nightfall, they risked being caught in another storm and possibly found by the outlaws. Fear pulsed through Evelyn's veins like a drumbeat, but she clung to the only things keeping her together: Lucy's safety and Jake's steadfast presence. Little did she know that an even more extraordinary test of her courage was about to unravel. Darkness fell like a curtain, and the snow quickened, swirling in a fresh gust of wind. But in the distance, through the skeletal outlines of the pines, flickers of light beckoned. Palmer's outpost was close. Jake saw the lanterns first. "See those," he said, pointing toward a valley just below. "That's got to be Palmer's. We're nearly there." Lucy let out a trembling sigh. Evelyn felt her spirits lift. Civilization meant warmth shelter, and possibly law enforcement backups. Even so, she stayed alert, scanning the trees for any sign of pursuit. They picked up pace, stumbling down the final slope. Palmer's outpost turned out to be a small cluster of buildings, a livery, a dusty saloon, a general store, and a few rough cabins. Perhaps 24 residents at most. Smoke curled from chimneys, and a couple of lanterns lit the main street. It wasn't much, but it was a safe haven compared to the wild canyons. Jake led them to the livery stable first, ensuring their animals could be fed and housed. A wrinkled old man named Jed took the reins, glancing curiously at the ragged travelers. "Storm's been fierce," he remarked, leading the animals into warm stalls. "You folks look half frozen." "We are," Jake agreed. "Any place to bed down for the night?" Jed scratched his whiskered chin. "Saloon's got a couple rooms upstairs, but it ain't fancy." Evelyn's feet felt like blocks of ice, and Lucy's teeth were chattering. Even a threadbare saloon sounded heavenly at this point. They thanked Jed and trudged across the muddy street. The saloon's sign read, "Palmer's Refuge," swaying in the wind. Inside, the atmosphere was dim and smoky, with a scattering of patrons nursing drinks around small tables. A long bar stretched along one wall, the bartender's moustache drooping. Heads turned as Evelyn and Lucy entered, trailing behind Jake. Women and children were rarities out here, let alone traveling with a Texas Ranger. Jake approached the bartender, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair. "We need 2 rooms if you got 'em." The man eyed them. "Got 2 left at the top of the stairs. That'll be $2 each." Evelyn's heart sank. Her funds were perilously low. She reached for her small purse, but Jake laid a gentle hand on her arm. "I've got this," he said, quietly, sliding coins across the bar. She started to protest, but he shook his head, his eyes kind. "We'll settle it later." With that done, the bartender handed them 2 keys. "There's hot stew if you want it." The thought of a real meal nearly made Evelyn weep with gratitude. She nodded. "Yes, please." They took a table near the fireplace, the warmth seeping into their frozen bones. Lucy yawned, leaning against her mother while Jake scanned the saloon with the practiced eye of a lawman. He seemed to gauge every occupant's potential threat level before relaxing slightly. Moments later, a barmaid brought steaming bowls of stew. The savory aroma of beef onions and potatoes filled the air. Lucy devoured hers hungrily, and Evelyn ate with a hunger that matched her daughter's. Jake, too, polished off his bowl in short order. When their bellies were full, Jake spoke quietly to Evelyn. "Once you two are settled, I'm going to talk to the local folks, see if there's any news about Hardy or his gang." Evelyn nodded. "All right. But please, be careful." Jake managed a small smile. "Always am." With that, Evelyn gathered Lucy, and they climbed the narrow staircase to the cramped rooms. Lucy chose the smaller one, content with a single bed. Evelyn's had an extra cot, though the walls were so thin she could hear the faint strains of piano music from the saloon below. Still, it was warm and secure, a world away from last night's peril. Evelyn helped Lucy settle in and kissed her forehead. "You sleep tight now, darling." Lucy clung to her mother's hand. "Mama, are we safe here?" She forced a reassuring smile. "Safer than we've been. Lucy, Jake will keep us safe." Lucy nodded, eyes heavy. "I like him," she murmured. "He's kind." Evelyn's stomach fluttered at her daughter's admission. "Yes, he is." When Lucy's breathing slowed, Evelyn slipped from the room, standing alone in the hallway. Her mind whirled with everything that had happened. Andrew's death, the bank's foreclosure, the mountain storm outlaws, and now the simmering sense that her life was changing. She had only known Jake Carter for a short while, yet she felt a connection that defied logic. She returned to her own room, thinking about how Jake had opened up about his wife, how he had protected them every step of the journey. It was more than a ranger's duty. Some part of him cared deeply. As exhaustion rolled over her, Evelyn lay down, listening to the muted hum of conversation and clink of glasses from below. She prayed Lucy was right, that they were indeed safe. Tomorrow, they would continue to El Paso. Tomorrow, maybe she'd see a path forward. Morning arrived with a pale sun cresting the horizon. The saloon was quiet as Evelyn and Lucy made their way downstairs. Most patrons had either left or were still sleeping off the previous night's whiskey. The bartender doled out hot coffee and scrambled eggs for breakfast. Jake was already there, finishing his meal. He looked up and offered a nod. "Morning," Evelyn responded with a shy smile. "Good morning. Did you find anything out last night?" Jake took a sip of coffee. "Some. Folks here heard rumors of a gang riding through a few days back, men who matched Hardy's description. They came in, demanded supplies, and left. Since then, a couple cabins in the region have been ransacked. People are on edge." Lucy's grip on her mother's arm tightened. "Can't the local sheriff do something?" Jake's eyes flicked to Lucy sympathetically. "There is no sheriff out here, honey. Not enough population. That's why the rangers roam these parts." Evelyn set Lucy's plate of eggs before her. "We should try to reach El Paso today if possible." Jake nodded. "The weather's improved. I'd say we can make it by nightfall if we ride hard." He paused, looking at Lucy. "But you'll be pushing yourselves. You both up for it?" Evelyn and Lucy exchanged glances. The notion of traveling more was daunting, but the idea of outrunning the outlaws spurred them on. Lucy lifted her chin in a show of bravery. "We can do it." Jake smiled, tipping his hat in admiration. "All right then, I'll ready the horses." Within the hour, they were on the trail once more, heading southwest. The terrain gradually shifted the mountains, giving way to flatter expanses dotted with low scrub. The wind was cold, but less vicious than before. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt the stirrings of hope. As the miles passed, she and Jake rode side by side, Lucy trailing behind on the donkey. They conversed in hushed tones, their words easily lost to the wind. Evelyn found herself confiding in him about Andrew's dreams for their ranch, the regrets she held for not cherishing their last days together. Jake listened intently, offering solace born of shared grief. In turn, he spoke quietly of Maria, how she used to joke that he'd never be domesticated enough to hang up his ranger badge. She'd tell me every time I left, "Bring that star back home in one piece, Carter, or I'll tan your hide myself," he said, a wistful smile touching his lips. That day's ride became a balm for two wounded hearts, each confession or recollection weaving a subtle tether between them. Evelyn never intended to care for another man again. Her heart had been so full of Andrew that she could hardly conceive letting anyone else in. But life on the frontier was unpredictable. It tested one's strength, and in the voids, sometimes sparked new connections. By late afternoon, El Paso's outskirts came into view, a sprawl of adobe and wooden buildings shimmering in the desert light. Evelyn felt tears well up at the prospect of reuniting with Andrew's cousin Clara. At last they had reached civilization's edge. They rode through the bustling streets, dust swirling under the hooves of their animals. El Paso was a frontier town of broad thoroughfares, lined with saloons, stores, and stage depots. It was a place where cultures merged. Mexican families, Anglo settlers, travelers from the East, all forging a new life in the borderlands. Evelyn guided Jake to Clara's small home. She knocked on the door, heart pounding. Soon Clara, a short, robust woman with graying hair, opened it. A flurry of exclamations followed as she embraced Evelyn and Lucy, tears running down her cheeks. "I was worried sick about you two." They ushered Lucy inside, where Clara clucked over the child's thin frame and chapped cheeks. In the warmth of a modest parlor, Evelyn introduced Jake. Clara quickly recognized the ranger's star and launched into a grateful speech praising him for saving her kin. Jake, ever modest, simply tipped his hat. Clara insisted that Evelyn and Lucy stay, stating they had a spare room. "It's small, but you'll be safe here until you figure out your next steps," she said, pressing a hot mug of tea into Evelyn's hands. Evelyn's heart flooded with relief. For the first time in forever, she felt settled. Jake set down his hat politely, declining Clara's offer to stay, explaining that he had official ranger business in town. "I need to coordinate with the local law. Hardy and his gang are still at large," he said gravely. Clara fussed over him too, offering him a hot meal. He accepted, giving Evelyn and Lucy a warm farewell. But as he turned to go, Lucy sprang forward and hugged him, surprising them both. "Thank you," Lucy said, her voice muffled against Jake's coat. "We wouldn't have made it without you." Jake's eyes glistened. He gently ruffled her hair. "You're a brave girl, Lucy. Take care of your mama." He looked at Evelyn. For a moment, time stood still. Neither said a word, but an unspoken promise lingered in the air. Then he inclined his head in a goodbye and stepped outside the door, clicking shut behind him. Evelyn stood in the foyer, her heart torn between gratitude for safety and a sudden aching sense of loss at his departure. They say the frontier shapes people in unexpected ways, forging bonds like iron in fire. For Evelyn Stone, The next chapter of her life began here in a humble home in El Paso, overshadowed by the events that had united her fate with Jake Carter's. She was safe for the moment, but her story and the Rangers were far from over. Weeks passed in El Paso as Evelyn and Lucy slowly began to rebuild their lives. Clara, ever generous, helped them settle. Lucy was enrolled in school, and Evelyn took on small jobs, sewing, baking, and laundry to make ends meet. Though life was modest, it was safe. Yet Jake Carter's presence lingered both in memory and in occasional visits. He often brought little gifts, candy for Lucy Thread, for Evelyn, but left quickly, his duties pulling him away. Rumors swirled of Hardy's gang hiding near the border. Shootouts and robberies painted the region in fear. Jake, deeply involved in the pursuit, was often gone. His visits, though brief, brought unspoken tension and longing. One evening, Jake arrived at Clara's doorstep, weary and dust-covered. He brought grave news Hardy's gang had been located in an abandoned silver mine near the border. The Rangers were preparing to move, and Jake would be leaving by morning. The mission would be dangerous. Before leaving, Jake asked Evelyn something unexpected. If he survived, he wanted to court her properly. Evelyn, overcome by emotion, agreed. In that tender moment, they shared their first kiss, gentle and full of hope. Lucy, wide-eyed and grinning, caught them just afterward, sealing the moment with a hug. Jake departed into the Texas night, promising he'd return. Time crawled. Telegrams brought news of skirmishes and wounded Rangers, but no word of Jake. Evelyn clung to daily tasks, praying for his safety. One stormy night, a young Ranger, Tom Miller, arrived at their door. Jake was alive, but injured. He had been shot in the shoulder during the final assault on Hardy's hideout. Hardy escaped, but Jake had insisted on coming back. Miller brought him by wagon. Seeing Jake pale and bloodied broke Evelyn's heart. She cradled him, whispered words of comfort, and helped care for him once he was brought inside. Days passed in quiet vigil. Slowly, Jake recovered, whispering confessions of guilt and regret in his fevered dreams. Evelyn stayed by his side. When Jake finally woke fully stronger and smiling, he took Evelyn's hand and made his intentions clear. He wanted to marry her. Evelyn said yes, her heart full at last. Days turned into weeks with no word from Jake. Evelyn clung to hope as telegrams brought scattered news. Rangers fighting Hardy's gang, a few men captured, others wounded. But Hardy remained elusive, and worry gnawed at her. Then one night, a knock shattered the silence. A young Ranger, Tom Miller, stood at the door with grave eyes. Jake was alive, but wounded, shot in the shoulder during a raid on Hardy's mountain hideout. Despite his injury, Jake insisted on returning to El Paso. Exhausted, he lay in a wagon outside. Evelyn rushed to him, heart pounding. He managed a faint smile. "Told you I'd come back," he whispered. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she helped him inside. The days that followed blurred into a haze of care. Jake burned with fever, sometimes murmuring about Maria, his late wife, and battles fought in the dust and dark. Evelyn stayed by his side, soothing him, praying for healing. Slowly, he recovered. One morning, as sunlight spilled across the room, Jake opened his eyes to see Evelyn asleep beside him. He gently woke her. Their eyes met, filled with relief and love. "I guess we have some matters to settle," he said with a smile. "Yes," Evelyn whispered, "we do." When Jake fully recovered, the first thing he did was kneel by Evelyn's side, rifle set aside star shining on his vest. He took her hand and asked simply, "Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Lucy squealed with joy, clapping her hands. Clara dabbed tears from her cheeks. Evelyn pressed her shaking hand to her lips. Tears glistening. In a voice thick with emotion, she answered, "Yes, Jake Carter, with all my heart." They married in the small adobe church near the center of El Paso, the kindly Father Gonzalez officiating. Lucy stood proudly as a flower girl tossing petals down the aisle. Word spread fast that a Texas Ranger was marrying a frontier widow. Folks gathered to witness the union, to share in a rare moment of joy amid the hardships of the borderlands. Evelyn wore a simple cream dress Clara helped sew. It wasn't fancy, but to Jake she looked like an angel walking toward him. As they exchanged vows, each promised not only to love and cherish, but also to fight for each other, an acknowledgement of the rough frontier life they both knew. "By the power vested in me," Father Gonzalez announced, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Jake leaned in, and their kiss sealed a union born of survival, forged by adversity, and sanctified by hope. Lucy threw her arms around them both, beaming through tears. The small congregation erupted in applause. Jake and Evelyn Carter settled in El Paso, though Jake often ventured out on ranger duty. He struck a deal with a local rancher to give Evelyn and Lucy a patch of land to keep animals on and to start anew. Lucy thrived her initial wariness of the West, melting into a fierce determination to help Jake and her mother. She even started training on horseback with a local volunteer cavalry group, dreaming of someday being as strong and brave as the ranger who saved their lives. Months passed peacefully. Hardy's gang disbanded many captured by the Rangers. Though Hardy himself remained at large, Jake never stopped searching. Each time he left home, Evelyn's heart clenched with the fear of losing him. But every time he returned, the love between them grew stronger, fortified by each embrace, each shared laugh, each small victory. On one crisp morning, as the sun rose over the desert hills, Jake, Evelyn, and Lucy rode out together. This time, not fleeing a storm, but enjoying the vastness of their new home. The path was bright with promise, and though the frontier still held its dangers, they faced them as a family. In the relentless heartbeat of the Wild West, they had found a rare and precious treasure hope. Love and the unwavering certainty that two souls tempered by tragedy could forge a future free from the shadows of the past. Thank you for journeying into the rugged heart of the Wild West with me, where Evelyn Stone and her daughter Lucy found love, hope, and a second chance in the arms of Texas Ranger Jake Carter. Their story reminds us that even life's fiercest storms can be weathered when courage and faith burn bright. Through icy mountain passes and lawless frontiers, love proves stronger than bullets or blizzards, binding two souls together under the wide Texan sky. If you were inspired by Evelyn's resilience and Jake's devotion, please like this video, share it with friends who love a heart-pounding Western drama, and subscribe to this channel for more tales of daring adventure and unforgettable romance. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and I can't wait to take you on our next epic journey. Until then, ride tall and stay brave, partners.